the truth about the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower 10-part series. Answers to every question you may have and questions that you need to be asking. This is part 4 of 10, and if you have not watched part 1, 2, and 3, please go watch those first, because we are kind of building a foundation as we're going forward and then working off of that. So pieces of information that I've explained well in the first video, I build upon in the second, and so forth. So forth, is that a word? So on? Whatever. Anyway, I'm going to get straight into this. Now, there are a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses that presently hold what I call a persecution complex. Now, they really didn't come up with this on their own. This has been a key feature, a key doctrine or teaching, and philosophy, and just kind of train of thinking that the organization of the Jehovah's Witnesses really passes on to its members. And that is, in a nutshell, that the world is out to get and destroy them as individuals and corporately as an organization. And so what they teach is that we're in a present battle. Satan and God are doing this battle, right? And Satan uses people to destroy God's people. Satan uses people to infiltrate the church and the family dynamic, and he has all these tactics that he employs to get people to not want to become a Jehovah's Witness, or if they are one, to steal them away, so that way they'll be lost and they won't have everlasting life and they won't inherit the new earth. And that Satan really uses these people as like pawns to destroy God's future plans for having this wonderful new earth. And so that's kind of the gist of it. And so this persecution complex, where it comes into play here, is that anytime anyone says or does anything against a Jehovah's Witness or against the Watchtower or them corporately, there's never any possibility that what they could be saying is valid. It has to have been a plot of the devil. It was rather a plot of the devil in that Satan's making them think this and it's not true, or it's a plot of the devil in that the accusation is true, but Satan's the one that's making it happen. So they're able to completely dodge accountability both angles. So let me give you an example to that. Someone accuses the Jehovah's Witnesses of having a pedophile in leadership. What's their first line of defense? Persecution. Satan put that thought into their brains to pull away people from believing that the Jehovah's Witnesses are, God's appointed organization and so forth. They're lies. Okay, so that's their first defense. They're lies of the devil. But what happens if it's proven to be true, or even the person, the elder, confesses to having done this thing? Satan made him do it. The devil is working through even members of the organization to destroy God's plan, to destroy God's people. So Satan made him do it in order to work against God and God's future plans for bringing his kingdom here on earth. So no matter what, it's persecution. And no matter what, it's Satan rather creating the scenario as a lie, or Satan is creating the scenario and making it happen. But they have an excuse and a way out of all accountability, and that is this persecution doctrine that they teach, this persecution complex, that they're able to very successfully hide behind, because everything that has to do with anything that possibly could make them look anything other than them being God's chosen people, anything other than that is the workings of the devil. Always the workings of the devil. There's no possibility for any validity in any of it whatsoever. So we're really going to focus on one aspect of this today. I have dozens of things that I found over the last 6 months regarding the way that they use this persecution complex to avoid accountability and to gain more power over more people. But for this particular video, I decided I was going to go with one in particular because it is the most misunderstood thing in history that the Jehovah's Witnesses teach through this lens of this persecution complex, that is the most untrue, with the highest level of devastation that the lie could possibly have on humanity. And so I chose to focus this one video on this one example alone. This is not the only example, you guys. Like I said, I have dozens of examples, and they're going to be illustrated a little more throughout all of the notes that I can provide you guys with, which are really just references to tons and tons and tons of material on this. But in this particular video, I want to focus on the Nazi regime. And I know I'm going to be completely demonetized for talking about this in the video, so good thing for you guys, you probably won't have no ads you have to deal with, because some of the words I'm using throughout this video are very big no-nos on YouTube. The Jehovah's Witnesses have painted a picture that during the time of the Nazi regime, when Hitler was in power, the picture they paint today is so far from the reality of actually what took place and why it took place. And I would like to shed some light on that. And I do not expect any of you to believe me without doing a lot of investigating on your own first. So the first thing that I want to say is that the Jehovah's Witnesses individually, not corporately, but individually, that lost their lives and went through all of this torture, they did it because they believed to the depths of their souls they were taking a stand for God, and they were being martyrs for their faith. That is what they believed. That, however, is not what was happening. There was an actual reason outside of the fact that Hitler was just, I don't know the guy individually, but just by looking at the fruit of everything he did, I have to say he was probably quite a heartless individual. So I'm not going to point all of the fingers for this in one direction, but I am going to shed some light on some aspects of the whole situation that most people know nothing about. And so what I am going to say is that the present teaching that all of these Jews, hundreds and hundreds of Jehovah's Witnesses, that lost their lives, that believed that they were laying their lives down for God as a martyr. The reality is that the real reason that the majority of them, not all of them necessarily, I'm not saying this was absolutely Hitler's only motivation, but the majority of the persecution that they suffered wasn't actually persecution. It was retribution. It was consequence. And I'm going to explain to you why that is. They literally were paying for the sins of another individual. As an individual who is a Jehovah's Witness, you're tying yourself into being subject to being reprimanded for the actions of those that also represent the organization. So if you are a Jehovah's Witness and the Jehovah's Witnesses have done something sinister or wrong, unfortunately, you're going to, as a fellow witness, carry some of the brunt of that reputation upon yourself. And unfortunately, what ended up happening in Germany was that the leadership of the Watchtower organization was putting the entire congregation at risk by the type of conduct that he was demonstrating. And I'm going to go into details about all of that so that way you guys can see that the way that they dance around accountability sometimes has very, very harsh consequences. And when those harsh consequences befall them, they run screaming, persecution, persecution. Satan is at it again. But what if it doesn't have necessarily anything to do with Satan? It has to do with the fact that for every action we have, there is a consequence. And sometimes those consequences can look like persecution, but often the results that follow our decisions and our actions, they're just directly tied to the behaviors, and they're just directly a consequence of our choices. They're not necessarily Satan out to get us or anything like that. No, I'm not saying there isn't the possibility that Satan is real and that he does do things to negatively impact us as beings. I honestly don't know. But I do know that if you cross the street without looking, there is the potential you're going to get hit by a car. And if you do get hit by a car, that was not the driver trying to persecute you. Sometimes things just happen directly as a result of our choices and behaviors. So I'm going to get into this here and give you guys the intel on what I've learned about this one particular situation where, 100 years later or so, or however long it's been, they're crying, it was persecution, and, praise be to all the martyrs that were willing to lay their lives down for, the faithful and discreet slave and all of that. But I want to show you guys the other side of this, and I want to show you the perspective of it might not have been actually as much persecution as it could have been possibly just direct consequence. So there was, like I had said before, there were many, many, many examples of the potential for persecution that the Jehovah's Witnesses have kind of talked about in their Awake magazines and all this stuff, where they were persecuted here, they were persecuted there. And I did my investigating on most of this. And I'm not saying there was never a situation where a Jehovah's Witness actually suffered persecution just because of their beliefs and just because they were a Christian, because I think there are situations where that has happened. But the large scandals and the times when there was, hundreds or thousands of people being persecuted, a lot of those situations that I found, there was two sides to the story. There was the story that the Jehovah's Witnesses were teaching at the time, that it was going on, and looking back in how they have reflected in their writings about it now, there were two sides to the story. And of course, the only side they write about is how they were very innocent, godly, Bible-fearing people that for no reason other than the fact that they were on God's side, they were being persecuted. That was it, because Satan was after them, because Satan is after all godly people and all people that hold the truth, and they're really the only ones that hold the truth. So they really kind of teach that they're the only ones being persecuted, when actually, if you look around the world, there are way more Christians that are not Jehovah's Witnesses that are being persecuted and killed than there are Jehovah's Witnesses that are being persecuted and killed. But they don't ever speak about that. They truly make it look like they are the only ones that are being persecuted, because they're really the only ones that are a threat to Satan, and it's just not true. So we're going to get into looking at that. So what is the truth about the Jehovah's Witnesses' persecution during the Holocaust? This is going to be difficult for you guys to hear, especially if you've been a witness and you have been indoctrinated with the belief system that the Jehovah's Witnesses were in opposition to Hitler and his regime and the things that he was doing to the people and the Christians and the Jews and everything else that was going on at the time. The truth of the matter is, in the beginning, the very beginning, when Russell was the president over the organization, Russell actually was zealous for the Jews, and he was a Zionist, and he was on fire for the idea that the Jews were going to go back and take over their land again, and he prophesied that. And I'm not saying Russell was an amazing guy, but from what I can see when I look back through all of his writings and the reputation he had, was Russell was cut from a very different cloth than Rutherford. And Russell, he had a passion and a love for the Jews. He was not an anti-Semitic kind of guy. He was a Zionist. However, when he was out of the picture and Rutherford came in, a whole nother feel. It changed everything. The whole dynamic of the organization changed. And one of the things that changed was that Rutherford did not love the Jews. He was very much opposed, and he would actually publicize levels of disgust when people would attach, even that he was taking, donations from the Jews or something like that. He would say, "I have never done business with a Jew. I would not accept a penny from them." I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But he was very, very firm in denying ever having done any business with the Jews or having any affiliation with them whatsoever. He considered them to be very, very evil people that had God's wrath waiting for them. And so what he did, I'm just going to kind of run through and paraphrase this, and I'll give you guys details after, but in a nutshell, what happened was, at the time that Hitler was overseeing the Nazi regime, and he was doing all of the things that he was doing, the very anti-Semitic movement and everything that was going on, Rutherford was the president at that time of the Watchtower. And of course, part of the teachings, the Jehovah's Witness teachings, is that you have nothing really to do with war and the army, and you do need to pledge allegiance to your present government. And because of the doctrine of the Watchtower, they were instructed by Rutherford not to plead allegiance, to the Nazi regime, not to enroll in the army or anything like that. And so, as a consequence to them being, defying the laws of the land at the time, which to them they were justifying by religious conscience, they were shut down. Hitler shut them down and said, "Hey, you guys are not following the rules. You're not allowed to meet together anymore. That's the consequence. You're not allowed to meet anymore. You're not allowed to publish your magazines anymore. You're not allowed to have your church anymore. That's just the way it's going to be. So what Rutherford did is he sent Hitler a letter. And I have a copy of the letter. You guys can read it for yourselves. I can send it to you. It's been translated into English. He sent Hitler a letter that basically said, this is me really big time paraphrasing it. You guys can confirm my paraphrase. I think it's pretty accurate. He sent a letter to Hitler that basically said, dude, homie, come on. You know, I'm your buddy here. I see things the way you see things. I'm not preaching against you at all. I hate the Jews too. I know that sounds horrible, you guys, but this is what he's saying. I won't take a penny from them. I don't want anything to do with them. Everything that you stand for in opposition to them, I am on board with you. I hear you. And I'm no threat to you. Me and my group, my posse here, whatever, we're all on the same page with you. So come on, you know, lighten up a bit. Let us do our thing. Let us gather again. You'll see, like, read some of my publications. You'll see we're on the same page. I believe what you believe. I want what you want. There's nothing that you're teaching or doing that I disagree with. We're totally on the same page here. Cut from the same cloth. We want the same things. So I don't know where the problem is, but hopefully you could just, you know, chill a little bit and let us get back together doing our thing, and you go your way, I'll go my way, and yeah, nice doing business with you. So that's pretty much in a nutshell. I'm going to read some of it to you guys, but that's basically what he said. Like, just come on, like, back off. What's the problem here? I see things the way you see things. I'm not in opposition to you here one little bit. And so what he was trying to do there is in essence shake hands with Hitler in order to say, you know what, we can both function here side by side really easily because there's no conflict between our beliefs. And that's a very different story than what the present day Jehovah's Witnesses teach that Rutherford had to say to Hitler. What they teach now is that Rutherford right off the bat went to Hitler and was accusing him of persecution in such a way that was confronting him for persecuting the Jews. However, Rutherford was actually praising him for persecuting the Jews, but just confronting him for not allowing the Jehovah's Witnesses to continue on with doing their business. That is how and why he confronted him. It had nothing to do with the persecution of the Jews. He was 100% on board with that, and he made that very, very clear in his letters. So now what ended up happening was Hitler did not remove the ban the way Rutherford expected. And when Rutherford didn't get his way, he had a hissy fit, and he decided that he was going to make it his mission now to publicly, through publications, mock and antagonize Hitler. And I do have the evidence for this. I have pictures that he's drawn and he published mocking Hitler and his regime. I have letters of this. So those things are available to you. I'm not making this stuff up. He publicly attempted to humiliate, blackmail, and mock Hitler. And he basically said in his follow-up letter to him, dude, I gave you a chance, but now you're messing with God's chosen one, so be prepared to die. Don't say I didn't warn you. And that's a paraphrase, but honestly, that is pretty much what he said to Hitler. So I'm going to go into reading some of that. There's something I'd like for you guys to keep in mind, too, as I do that. And that is Rutherford is one of the founding forefathers of the present Jehovah's Witnesses organization, the Watchtower. It was first Russell, then Rutherford, Knorr, and then went on to the governing body. These are the individuals that claim to have the only direct access to God. They claim to be God's only chosen people, God's mouthpiece, God's modern prophet. They claim to be the ones and the only ones to have access to God. Now, at the time that he was doing this, at the time that Rutherford was alive doing this, in his opinion, he was the only one who had access to God's truth. That was like the gateway to the heavens, really. And as we look back, many years later, we can see that his behavior did not reflect in any way, shape, or form that of a godly man, a man who was truly looking out for the best interest of his people, because he put a lot of people in harm's way by antagonizing somebody that had the power to destroy them. And you really have to think about if a past leader was capable of that kind of behavior, how likely is it that the foundation to the present organization, that he was that foundation, how likely is it that that foundation truly was rooted in God and his anointing? And if it wasn't at that time God's organization, what year did God take over this organization to the point where we could say, yeah, in this particular year, it wasn't obviously God's organization, because look at the things they were doing. It was evil. But in 2001, that's when finally God decided, okay, now they're my chosen people. Like, you got to really think about it. If you can look back at in certain periods of time, from the time that they started way back in whatever it was, the late 1800s, I think, and then moving forward, if at different periods of time you look at it and you say, there's no way that God could have been behind that kind of behavior, you have to start thinking, is it possible in 100 years from now you would be looking at how they're conducting themselves now, and in the future refer to this time period now with the same disdain and say, there's no way that they were God's chosen people in the year 2020, because look at what they were doing. Like, let's say the rampant pedophilia, just as an example. So it's something I want you guys to think about, because it's the same organization. It's the same organization. That's the thing. It's just grown over the years and having new people in leadership. That's the only thing that's different. So their teaching, well, actually their teachings have changed quite a bit over the years, but the foundation is still the same. So in the process of Rutherford wanting to appease and shake hands with Hitler, he wrote something called the Declaration of Facts book. And so the Watchtower attempted to do the best they could to partner with Hitler and say, hey, this German government, I see things the same way. I want the same things. We're on the same page. We're both heading in the same direction. We have the same goals. We have the same beliefs. He wrote him a very detailed letter called the Declaration of Facts, and it accompanied a letter, actually, that he wrote with him. On page 138, it said, "Instead, therefore, of our literature and our works being menace to the principles of this present government," which was the Nazi regime, "we are the strongest supporters of such high ideals." So here he's saying they are the strongest supporters of the ideals that were being conducted and carried out through the Nazi regime, through Germany. Now, it's Watchtower's teaching that the Jehovah's Witnesses were imprisoned for their beliefs in the time of Germany's Holocaust, but what's never shared was that Rutherford's initial praise and attempts to shake hands with Hitler in his harsh stance against the Jews. present Jehovah's Witnesses know nothing about the anti-Semitic statements and position of Rutherford whatsoever. They actually think that Rutherford was in leadership taking a great stand against the persecution that was happening to the Jews, but it was actually that was the complete opposite to that. That was not part of the picture. He was not taking a stand for the Jews and the persecution against the Jews whatsoever. That did not happen. So Rutherford desired to have the ban lifted. And the ban, once again, was that they weren't allowed to publicize any of their literature. They weren't allowed to meet anymore and congregate. So what he did is, like I said, he attempted to go to Hitler and say, like, dude, come on, we're on the same side here. Wrote the Declaration of Facts, sent it to Hitler, sent a letter discussing his support of the Nazi regime. And what ended up happening was Hitler didn't respond the way he wanted. He ended up retaliating with his smear campaign and all of his threats, all different kinds of threats, from blackmailing him, saying, I'm going to go and write letters to the whole world and tell them what you're doing to believers, saying that God has anointed him, so he is God's anointed, and now that Hitler is daring mess with him, God is going to seek revenge on him. So I'm going to go through and read some of that in a moment from his letters, so you can see I'm not actually making that up. But these deceptive and hypocritical practices that Rutherford was participating in at the time, even though this was a long time ago, I'm still seeing the same type of tactics and shenanigans going on in the organization to this very day. So there were very stiff consequences for anyone that did not submit at the time to Hitler's plans and regime. And what I find interesting is that today the Jehovah's Witnesses are actually conducting themselves in similar fashions to how they did, or how Hitler did way back then. Very, very similar type of techniques and fear-based control and just, yeah. So anyways, Rutherford gave a huge endorsement for the high ideals of the Nazi regime and the government of Germany during Hitler's regime in the 1930s. And the Watchtower, via the leadership of Rutherford, made efforts to shake hands with one of the world's most wicked regimes to ever have existed in the history of time. And if that is the history of the Watchtower organization, that is their story. That is the tapestry from which they were designed. That's the foundation. That's the root. What good can come from such a poisoned root system? You've got to ask yourself that one. And I see so many similarities. Like I said, I see so many similarities to the Nazi regime and the present structure and organization of the Jehovah's Witnesses to this very day. And I am in no way surprised to hear that Rutherford was attempting to shake hands with Hitler during this, and that he had no problems with the Nazi regime. I am not surprised to actually hear that. So when Jehovah's Witnesses speak of the Holocaust to the congregation today, when they speak of it and they teach about it, it's essential that they understand that they're only hearing part of the story. Yes, Jehovah's Witnesses were persecuted. Yes, they died. But why? And it wasn't just because that was just what was going on at the time. There was instigation here. That was a big part of the picture. Hitler wasn't going to sit around and be mocked and have his power and authority held in question. He wasn't going to be blackmailed. And so what he did was he enacted his just reward, in his opinion, his just reward for the public disgrace and humiliation that he endured at Rutherford's hands. And he put his foot down and he said, you know what? I'm not going to stand for your nonsense. And so, I mean, the fact that only about 1,000 or so lives were lost, to me, is actually pretty impressive, considering, because we can see that Hitler had the power to murder millions of people. And if only roughly 1,000 Jehovah's Witnesses lost their lives, to me that's actually quite incredible, because when I look at some of the things that Rutherford was saying, I'm pretty surprised that Hitler didn't just annihilate all of them, because he had the power to do so, clearly. But anyways, I'm going to get back into this. So what is not expressed is that Rutherford initially praised Hitler for his stance against the Jews. Hitler sent many Jews to the concentration camps, where they endured unspeakable atrocities. Many lost their lives. But what's not discussed in the present Jehovah's Witness doctrine, you're not going to find it in Wake, you're not going to find it in the Watchtower, you're not going to find it in jw.org, is the hypocritical actions of Rutherford that led up to these deaths and the persecution. If he had not blatantly, publicly antagonized him, likely many of the witnesses would not have been, they wouldn't have had the fate that they had, that's for sure. In 1933, the Watchtower office in Berlin was closed, like I said, and the Jehovah's Witnesses were banned from meeting. That is what started this whole thing. But what's interesting about it is it really showed the fruit of Rutherford and his position, his anti-Semitic position, because if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have had any letters to this day where Rutherford would be talking about how much he despised the Jews, and maybe to this day we would have never even known that that is part of the history of the Watchtower. So I'm going to read another one here. This is from the Golden Age, 1927, February 23rd. Page 343. So I want you guys to see what Rutherford has to say about the Jews here. He says, "Be it known once and for all that those profiteering, conscienceless, selfish men who call themselves Jews and who control the greater portion of the finances of the world and the business of the world will never be rulers in this new earth. God would not risk such selfish men with such an important position." So during the time of Rutherford, Jehovah's Witnesses became known as a religion of hate. And due to the Watchtower's attacks against other Christians and churches and governments, they really started having a very negative reputation. And the Catholic Church ended up going to the Nazi government, kind of complaining and saying, hey, like, look what they're doing. They have this massive smear campaign against us. And the Nazi government actually ended up responding to that. And that's part of the reason that in 1933, the Nazi government banned the Watchtower's German operations entirely. So there was several reasons for why this happened. But like I said, Rutherford's response to that was extremely immature and very dangerous, and the consequences that they faced as a result of that were very heinous. So like I said, the government, in response to, the Catholic Church complaining and so on and so forth, they banned and persecuted the Jehovah's Witnesses because of the extreme hate speech and hypocrisy. It wasn't because they were taking a stand for the Jews. That didn't have anything to do with it. It was directly a consequence for their hate speech in a variety of capacities. So in an effort to overturn the ban, Rutherford sent the letter of declaration into Hitler. And of course I have a copy of that for you guys. Part of the letter, I want to read just the intro. He says, "The Brooklyn headquarters of the Watchtower Society is pro-German in an exemplary way and has been for many years. The Bible researchers of Germany are fighting for the very same high ethical goals and ideals. The conference came to the conclusion that there are no contradictions when it comes to the relationship between the Bible researchers of Germany," so that is the Jehovah's Witnesses organization, by the way, "to the national government of the German Reich? I don't know how to pronounce that one, sorry guys. Basically, it's the Hitler, the Nazi regime. To the contrary, referring to the purely religious and unpolitical goals and efforts of the Bible researchers, it can be said that these are in full agreement with the identical goals of the national government of the German Reich. R-E-I-C-H. I do not know how to pronounce that. We are looking forward to your kind approval, which we hope to receive soon, and want to assure our highest respect to you, Honorable Mr. Reichskanzler." I have no idea, but I know that means something to do with Honorable Prince or something like that. Basically, it's a title for Hitler, but it's not his name. It's what they call him. Anyways, yours faithfully, Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. So that's part of the letter that he sent them. And then there is the Declaration of Facts as well, which is a kind of like a book that he wrote specifically to him to get him to change his mind. So Rutherford and Knorr organized a public convention in Berlin on the 25th of June in 1933 to release this Declaration of Facts, being pronouncing at the Germany Convention, and the distribution of the letter. It was a letter format that they distributed it. Oh my goodness, I can't talk. And this outlined Watchtower's support of the German government and its stance against the Jews. Now, here's where it gets really disturbing and shocking, and I saw some of the imagery of this kind of thing and the things that people had to say about it. But this convention that took place was dressed up in a really dark, evil way, and it was dressed up in such a way to say, hey, we are on the side of the Nazi regime. The convention hall was decked with swastikas, and the program was opened with a song. It was Song 64, which is a song from the Bible Student Songbook that has the exact same melody by Haydn as the German national anthem. So they walk in, and what do they see? But this room filled with people, swastikas everywhere, singing this song that has the exact same melody as the German national anthem. And this was something that Rutherford and Knorr organized to show their allegiance to Hitler without directly contradicting the doctrine that teaches that they're not allowed to do such things. So no, they didn't bow down to him. No, they didn't join the army or anything like that. But they put on this convention with swastikas everywhere and singing this song in order to show and to demonstrate that they're on the same side. And so Conrad Franke said, when we entered, we found the hall bedecked with swastika flags. But not only that, when the meeting started, it was begun with a song that we had not sung for years, especially not in Germany, because of the melody of Deutschland, Deutschland über alles. Probably saying that very, very wrong. So can you imagine how we felt Many could not join in the singing. It was as though their throats were throttled. What kind of leaders did we have who brought us into such dangers? And the danger of faltering under these circumstances instead of helping and supporting us so that we could take a fearless stand against Nazism. So he's saying, like, how is this happening? How are you standing here organizing all these people with all these Nazi flags and singing this song? Why are you not educating us how to take a stand against this and take a stand for the Jews? What are we doing? That comes from the Declaration of Facts that was reprinted in 1934. So instead of being against the principles advocated by the government of Germany, we stand squarely for such principles, Rutherford said in that declaration. We stand squarely for such principles. A careful examination of our books and literature will disclose the fact that the very high ideals held and promulgated by the present national government, which was the Nazi regime, are set forth in and endorsed, strongly emphasized in our publications. So he's saying, like, hey, we're your greatest supporter here. When you shut us down, you're literally shutting down part of your marketing strategy. You know, this is basically what he's saying here. So Rutherford's letter and declaration were an effort to appease Hitler, but to no avail. And when Rutherford's efforts at appeasing Hitler failed at achieving his aims, Rutherford instead antagonized Hitler through his publications, and that resulted in the consequences that befell the entire Jehovah's Witness organization in that area, which was extreme persecution and death for many of them. On October 7th, 1934, the congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide sent cablegrams to Hitler, all at the same time. So can you imagine modern day that would be like having however many it was, I don't know if it was hundreds or thousands or whatever, but sending hundreds or thousands of emails to like President Bush or something like that. He's not the president anymore, but just as an example, hundreds or thousands of emails like coming in all at the exact same moment and stating something that was basically a threat. So all around the world, everybody part of this organization at one time sending a message saying, you better watch out because we're after you. This is pretty much what happened. So once again, October 7th, 1934, the congregations of the Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide sent cablegrams to Hitler all at the same time with this threat. And I'm going to read the threat that was contained in these cablegrams that they sent him. And you can't tell me, if Hitler received tons of cablegrams that said this, that he wouldn't have a bit of a bone to pick with them after this. The cablegram said, Hitler, government, Berlin, Germany, your ill treatment of Jehovah's Witnesses shocks all good people of earth and dishonors God's name. Refrain from further persecuting Jehovah's Witnesses. It does not say from the Jews. It says from persecuting Jehovah's Witnesses. Otherwise, God will destroy you. You and your national party. So tell me now, after hearing that, Rutherford organizing a massive group of people around the world to send a message to Hitler, to say to him, if you do not do what we tell you to do, God will destroy you and your party. I mean, how can you tell me that after receiving a message like that it was just persecution that happened to befall the Jehovah's Witnesses, and that they were brought into these, concentration camps, and they were tortured, and many of them lost their lives. But it had nothing to do with the fact that they literally just threatened him on a global scale. In my opinion, this was why they were numbered among the Jews. It was a personal vendetta between Rutherford and his campaign against Hitler. His direct threats and blackmail got under Hitler's skin, and he decided enough is enough. So Rutherford then sent another letter attempting to blackmail Hitler, this time threatening Hitler with the punishment of God if the ban of the Jehovah's Witnesses wasn't lifted again. And this time he threatened to also slander him globally. So he said, "You may successfully resist any and all men, but you cannot successfully resist Jehovah God. I demand that you give order to all officials and servants of your government that Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany be permitted to peacefully assemble and without hindrance worship God. If by the 24th day of March in 1934 there is no response to this earnest demand, and nothing done by your government to grant the relief of the aforesaid Jehovah's Witnesses in Germany, then God's people in other countries will begin the publication throughout the nations of the earth the facts concerning Germany's wrongful treatment of Christian people there. And having delivered the testimony, we will submit our case and leave it to Jehovah God, and by and through Christ Jesus to administer the punishment of the guilty ones in his own good way. Permit me to remind you that Jehovah warns that no one shall oppress his anointed." So that took some courage. Note the way that he finishes this. Rutherford says, "Permit me to remind you that Jehovah warns that no one shall oppress his anointed." So of course he's referring to himself and the organization as his anointed, and he's basically saying, if you do not do this by the 24th day of March 1934, I am going to create a massive global smear campaign against you, and God is going to strike you down. So I don't think it's a coincidence that after that we started seeing Jehovah's Witnesses not being on the best, not being on Hitler's good side, and dealing with the ramifications of, he called him to war. He literally said, we're going to find out who's God's stronger here, or whose army is stronger. He literally basically took him outside and said, hey, I'll meet you outside, buddy. Let's see what you got. And Hitler showed him what he had. So I'm going to show you guys a few of the illustrations, that were in his publications. There's many you can find, but I'm going to show you a few of the ones that he had in his publications when he started his smear campaign. He didn't just threaten him that he was going to do this. He did it. And because he was doing it, it had to be put to a stop, and Hitler put it to a stop. Now, I'm not saying that it was right what Hitler did to put it to a stop. Definitely not. But he basically called him out and said, show me what you got. And so this is some of the, he had a cartoon kind of strategy. He would draw these illustrations and put them in his publications and, print them out hundreds of thousands of times. And basically all of them were mocking the Nazi regime. So here's one of them. And I have tons and tons of these. I'm not going to show you all of them, but you guys can find all of them online. There's a whole bunch in this one. So these are all things that Rutherford and Knorr put together in part of their campaign against Hitler. So the public mockery and aggression of Rutherford towards Hitler provoked and exasperated all of this persecution that actually came upon the witnesses. And in my opinion, that's not really the definition then of persecution, because it to me seemed more like retribution. Hitler was the one in charge, and even if you were to look at our present authorities, if you were to take any present government, let's say North America, let's say the Prime Minister of Canada or the President of the United States, if you were to be in that presidency and you were to suddenly have an organization rise up against you, sending thousands of emails saying they're going to basically annihilate or kill you, that they're going to create a campaign against you that's just going to be just filled with hate and all of this stuff. How long do you think that could go on before that individual or group would face some consequences, even legal consequences? Like, how long before President Trump would be putting a stop to that kind of behavior? I don't think it would take very long. So would we say then that the consequences that they faced for that behavior were persecution? Or would we say that would be, you know what, if you're going to try to blackmail someone, you got to be ready to deal with the consequences of that decision? Would it be consequences? Or would it be persecution? And the Jehovah's Witnesses very much paint a picture that any consequence they face is not a consequence, it's not retribution, it's never just, it's always persecution. In my opinion, the Jehovah's Witnesses would have suffered way less had Rutherford acted more reasonably and with concern for their members in how they were conducting themselves. It was roughly about 1,200 individual Jehovah's Witnesses lost their lives during this in Germany, and I really believe it was a direct result, many of them, if not most of them, it was a direct result of Judge Rutherford's audacity and stupidity in antagonizing a very powerful man. So from the declaration of facts presented to Hitler, Rutherford employs Hitler to see that they are both on the same side and have the same goals. And here is one example of that, taken from that book of declaration. I have this book available to you guys if you'd like to print it for yourselves. It says, "A careful examination of our books and literature will disclose the fact that the very high ideals promulgated by the present national government," which is the Nazi regime, the German government, "are set forth and endorsed and strongly emphasized in our publications. Therefore, our literature and our works being a menace to the principles of the present government, instead of our literature and our works being a menace to the principles of the present government, we are the strongest supporters of such high ideals." I know I read that to you guys earlier, but so here's where the threats begin again. And he says in the declaration, here's what, when I was reading this declaration, I found it really interesting because the beginning of it is really appeasing, and it's like he's just kind of like brown-nosing, and he's just really appeasing to Hitler's ego, and hey, we're buddies, we're on the same side, we're cut from the same cloth. But then, right as he gets towards the end of this declaration letter, personality switch instantly. And he says at the end of this, "Jehovah God has emphatically expressed his anger against those who do persecute others who are trying to serve him. And this proves that those who persecute us do not represent God, but they are incited to do so by the enemy of God and man." And so he's sending this to Hitler, and it gets more intense as he goes. He goes on to say, so some more threats towards the end of this letter. "The present government, having declared adherence to the aforementioned high ideals, we are persuaded that the rulers do not desire to knowingly resist progressive witness work to the name of Jehovah God and his kingdom, which we are now carrying forward. If our work is merely that of men, it will fall of its own weight. If it is of Jehovah God and being carried forward in obedience to his commandment, then to resist it means to fight against God." So he's starting to just ramp up here a little bit towards the end of his letter. And he kind of ends it on the note of saying, don't wait for God to exact his revenge on you. Do what I said. I've asked you nicely. This is your warning. I've given you your deadline. For your best interests, you might want to obey me. This is literally Rutherford saying to Hitler, do or die. And he kind of leaves it at that. And then Hitler comes back and he puts an end to the story. And so the question is this: were the Jehovah's Witnesses purely persecuted for their faith? Or is it possible that at the least, in part, Hitler was antagonized, and the consequences for their attempts at blackmailing him and for publicizing a lot of hate speech towards him and publicly mocking him, that the consequence for that were many of the Jehovah's Witnesses lost their lives purely because they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and Rutherford, through his ignorance, made an enemy of Hitler. And through that, everyone that stood with Rutherford became an enemy of Hitler's. So it wasn't persecution. It was a different thing going on. Is it possible that it wasn't persecution? That it was, in essence, retribution and Hitler's way of putting his foot down and taking a stand for his power? Not saying it was right, but it's something to consider. So I'm going to kind of wrap up here, and I want to leave you guys with a final note, and that is it possible that some of the other persecutions that they have faced may also have sensible explanations, other than Satan's at work attempting to infiltrate one of God's only organizations? And is it possible that there could be actual legitimate explanations for some of the persecutions that the Jehovah's Witnesses endure? Some of the hardships they face, could they be direct consequences for their decisions? Could the reputation possibly have been earned? Is it possible that the level of persecution they have faced has been justified to some extent? Could their reputation merely be individuals and groups' attempts to hold them accountable to the same standards that the rest of the world is held accountable? Those are some questions to ask. Anytime an individual or a group decides that they are not subject to any authority other than God, and they happen to be the only ones that God speaks to, you have to question when they constantly are crying persecution, persecution, crying wolf all the time. You have to question if everybody is seeing them a certain way, and those people are actually saying they are suffering at their hands repeatedly. They are experiencing hardships because of them. You have to question, where is the persecution really coming from here, if there's any persecution to be had? Are they just completely gaslighting here? Is that what this is? And that's something to think about. Are they being persecuted, or are they persecuting and just flipping it around? These are some things to think about and to ask. This is part 4 of my 4-part series, The Truth About the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Watchtower. Hopefully you guys will tune into number 5. Thank you guys ever so much for your patience. I know this was a very deep, dark video, and some of the content we're covering is little much. So anyways, this is Carol Bird. Thanks, guys.